So I'm Clotilde. I am the Global Collections Manager at My China Roots. So a bit about me. I'm based in the UK, but I have Chinese Malaysian heritage on my father's side and French heritage on my mother's side. I've been working for My China Roots for, gosh, 7+ years now. Have done many different things for them, all kinds of research projects, working with families who have Chinese roots from all over the world. So we've worked, of course, with a lot of Chinese Americans, but also Chinese Singaporeans, Chinese Jamaicans, the list goes on. And throughout the years, we've learned a lot about what are the kinds of challenges that people are facing when trying to find out about their Chinese roots. What are some of the helpful tips that have helped people along their way? And what are some basically very specific things to keep in mind when you're doing this kind of research? So what I will be talking about today is, firstly, I will give you a bit of an overview of our organization, My China Roots. Then I'll tell you a bit about, I'll give you some key stats about the database itself. Then how can you actually access it? And then we'll have a bit of a sharing session where we can talk about some brick walls that we or that you have faced with your own Chinese family history research. And then I'll give you a demo, a live demo of how to use the tools and specifically what kind of resources are available through the My China Roots database. So I'm looking at my slides now. So Tana, do interrupt me if you see any question that at any point is we think is relevant to bring up. And I can just pause. But just to give you a bit of context about what we do and why we came about, really. My China Roots is a genealogy organization that was founded by people of Chinese heritage for people of Chinese heritage. So we started as a really customized, bespoke research consulting firm, and we still do this. We still advise on research for individuals who are just curious about their family history and need help, whether it's translation or roots trips, or just deciphering heirlooms. These are the kinds of things that we do. But we have also been developing a database of historical records. And this is my main role at My China Roots now, is researching what archival historical records are out there that people don't know about that can help them learn more about their Chinese ancestors. And this is basically what I'm going to be talking about today, the database. We also have a special Chinese family tree software that was designed for Chinese families. And this particular service basically does the research for you, similarly to other genealogy providers. We provide you with hints when there is a match between, say, a grandparent in your tree and a record that exists on our database already. Okay, so just to give you an overview of the My China Roots database. So for the last few years, we have been collecting and digitizing a wide variety of records, but these can be divided into two main groups or categories. So the first is the overseas Chinese bucket of records. So these are mostly going to be records of people after they left China. So whether they settled in Southeast Asia or North America, you might have immigration records or census records or community records of these newly established Chinese communities abroad. These are roughly 6 million and counting. We're adding more each week. And these are primarily in English and sometimes with some Chinese also in them. So these are all fully searchable on the website. And then we also have a separate category of records that are our mainland Chinese records. So these are records created in China, and mostly they correspond to Chinese family tree books. There's an estimated 200 million names in these books. I say estimated because they have not been fully indexed. These are massive, massive records, some of which contain thousands of Chinese names. They are full text searchable, but they have not been manually transcribed as of yet. Okay, so I'll be showing you more of what each bucket of record consists of during the demo, but this is just to give you a bit of an overview. In terms of who can actually use the database, now, of course, the database is designed for people who have Chinese roots, but there are so many different people who have roots in China and whose families immigrated at different times. So who is this really for? Our specialty, our focus is on people whose ancestors left China between the 1850s and the 1950s to 1960s. So from the gold rush to roughly the communist revolution. There are exceptions, of course. We will have records outside of these ranges, but this is most of, in terms of the records that we will have, this is the time period that will be covered. And if you look at the history of Chinese migration, this is also when the biggest waves happened in most places. And then historically, during that period, most people who came from China came from two key provinces. So the provinces of Guangdong and Fujian. These are in Southeast China. Again, having said that, we will also have records from other provinces in China, but this is where our focus is really going to be in. And similarly, most of our records at the moment are from North America, so US, Canada. We do have some record collections from Peru, from Cuba, from Singapore, and even Malaysia, as well as, yeah, a few other Caribbean countries. But these are much smaller compared to the North American collections. Our long-term vision, however, is to really cover the entire globe, focusing on one region at a time. We do want to be able to cater to different communities no matter where they come from. So similarly, although the platform is currently English speaking, we plan to have a Spanish version, a Filipino version, a French version, etc., as the years go on. So I do also often get questions about whether this platform is relevant to adoptees. Unfortunately not. The records that would be relevant to adoptees are not typically available for digitization or just available full stop. There are, of course, exceptions, but if you are interested in tracing biological family, or you're helping an adoptee with this kind of work, then this is something that we specialize in, separate to the database. So let me just drop a link to the My China Roots research services just in case. And then Tana, if you don't mind sharing that for those who might need it.
Yeah.
Thank you. So yeah, primarily this is the audience that we're catering to. So how do you access this database? So at the moment, what happened to this image? This was just an image of the FamilySearch library. I don't know why it's not loading right now, but at the moment, the database is available completely free until the end of the summer, until August 31st. So the FamilySearch library in Salt Lake City is currently trialing it and making it available for free to anyone who visits the library. So what you can do is just show up at the Salt Lake City FamilySearch, the FamilySearch library, and you can either use a computer that is on site, or you can use your own laptop or even your mobile phone. And then if you go to mychinarootslibrary.com, you will have full access. You'll be able to search everything without any restrictions. So I see that we have a few people who are not in Utah right now. So for those other folks, just letting you know, so we offer two versions really of the database. So we offer it to libraries like the FamilySearch library, but there are a few others in around the US that we offer this service to, like the Boston Public Library, San Francisco Public Library, LA Public Library, and a handful of others actually. So through your library, you have full access to the database. All you need is to either go there in person or bring your library card. We also have a personal account. for this, let me just share another link. So with a personal account, your access is exactly the same. The difference is you can build your own family tree, and it's sort of like a VIP express service. Rather than doing all of the searches yourself, we make it easy. You just upload your tree, forget about it, and then we let you know if we find a match between someone in your tree and someone in the database. So these are the different ways that you can access the database. If you don't see your public library listed here, then don't hesitate to send me an email as well, because we're constantly approaching other organizations who might be interested in making it available to the public. And the advantage is it's completely free for you guys. So let me just share two links. One link to register a personal account if needed. And the other one is my email address, which will be shared again at the end of the talk. Okay, so now I thought we could have a little chat, because it's always, I think, helpful to hear about what other people are going through. So I'd love to hear from those who are joining us today and who are happy to just share one or two sentences, wherever you're joining us from. Is well, where you're at in your search. If you've started researching your Chinese ancestors, what are you most curious about, and where might you be getting stuck?
So if anyone wants to participate and answer those questions, go ahead and just put those into the StreamYard chat or on whatever platform, like in the comments, and then we can actually add your question onto the stage. And if you would like, if you're in StreamYard, just put like on, if you want to actually talk directly, you can just put in your comment, I want to be added to the stage, and then we can put you on and you can actually talk to everybody who's here, which there's 156 people currently. Okay.
See, there's a question from Gail.
Yep.
Helping someone from Shanghai. Yes, you can access the database. Oh, not from a FamilySearch center, only currently from the main FamilySearch library in Salt Lake City. So, I mean, if enough people use it at the main library, and if you want to email someone at your local FamilySearch center, then that would probably help FamilySearch, decide to make it available in more locations. So yeah, sorry, Gail. Unfortunately, not currently, but if you send them an email, and suggest it, that might help them.
Yeah. Let's see.
Okay, so see a few comments coming in. Oh, hi, Douglas. Yep, we have the same surname. Mm,
Yeah. Yeah, Annie says, I know my parents are Toisin, but I can't read or speak Chinese to go further.
mm-hmm. Yes, thanks for sharing, Annie. I would say that's a very common, or not complaint, but just brick wall that a lot of people face. They just don't read or speak Chinese, so that means you can't necessarily ask relatives who might have more information. You can't read any clues that might have helpful info.
Yeah, and I would guess also that for those who do read Chinese, probably a lot of these records are probably in traditional, whereas
Yes,
I think a lot of people read
definitely.
simplified.
Yeah. I mean, if you read Chinese already, it's not impossible to read traditional, but yes, that is um, definitely one obstacle. And also sometimes the types of records that we're dealing with on the Chinese side are not only written in traditional form, but they can use classical Chinese, which is not quite a different language, but uses different grammar, different sentence formations, which just it's makes it much more challenging to understand. It's incredibly flowery. So that I would say is an even bigger obstacle than the traditional. So okay, I see. Hi, Charmaine. It's nice to see your name again. So you say you have the possible names of a few ancestors, but hit a wall in their Chinese names, and no records of their migration from China to Jamaica. Indeed, this is um, another challenge that some records simply don't seem to exist, or it's unclear whether they were kept or remain, depending on the country. Um, yeah, and unfortunately, the coverage of immigration routes is not consistent across the world. I mean, I have been told, for example, that there should be shipping lists from China to Malaysia where my ancestors ended up, but I have yet to see what such a list would even look like. Um,
Yeah.
okay. I see. Hmm.
Yeah. Steve Stevens
Yeah.
mentioned Roadblock. Um,
Hmm. Yeah,
Kathy.
Steve, absolutely. Again, mentioning the Chinese language difficulty is a big one for translating. If you find a tombstone, Chinese tombstones are insanely valuable, but if you can't read Chinese, you have no idea that it's really valuable. Um, and if you don't read Chinese, you might not even think to look for it. So that is definitely a big one. Um, I see Jim Lee also mentions he has a jiapu, a Chinese family tree book, which I'll talk about also, but you need an English translation. Indeed, we all do. Um, yeah, so again, the records that you find that you want to explore are in Chinese, but you cannot read them. I see some other questions about whether there are records of Chinese that traveled to the West Indies. There are some, but it depends where they traveled to. I'm only aware of a few resources. I think for mostly for Jamaica. I know a bit about Jamaican resources, but if you're interested in other countries, I can look at my own past research. Um, okay, so maybe I will. Okay, last one. Steve has some good comments. Steve says he's also had difficulty with place names, ancestral villages given on headstones. Uh, so locations in China are hard to find on modern maps due to changes in growth in China. Absolutely. So, okay, I think quite a few of you have touched upon some pretty typical roadblocks. I've listed some of the usual things that I hear all the time from people who get in touch with us. The first one being, I don't read or write Chinese. I have no idea what I'm looking at, what I should be looking at. Um, Sometimes it seems like there are not even records left. There's no clear indication as to where you should look. Um, you don't know where you should get started. The other challenges that were not really brought up or that I didn't see in the comments just now were to do with paper sons. I mean, this is very particular to the US, and I'll talk a little bit about this also later during my demo, but this does complicate the research process significantly. So for those who don't know, during the exclusion period, when a lot of Chinese people were not allowed into the US unless they had a good reason, unless they had the right paperwork, a lot of people arrived under false identities. And we called them paper sons because the way that they were able to immigrate was by saying that they were, for example, the son or the wife of, usually the son or, of a native Chinese American person. So someone who was already established and legally allowed to be in the US. Now the thing with paper sons is they were using a false identity. So you don't know if their name is their true name or a name that they just used to get into the country. And as a consequence of this phenomenon, you have a lot of, still to this day, older relatives in Chinese families who are really reticent to talk about the past. They, I guess it is a form of intergenerational trauma when you were, so sort of rejected by your host society that it's considered just suspicious to be asked where you're from at the end of the day. So this is something to keep in mind if you are researching Chinese American ancestors. And then the other challenge that I didn't really hear so much was about ancestors that carried many different names and many different name spellings. This is often one of the first, I guess it is connected, this brick wall is connected to the one about not finding records, because maybe you haven't found records because you were just focused on one name that you know belonged to your ancestor, but actually they went by many different names. And so there could be records of them, but under an alias. So really the first step to doing your Chinese genealogy research is the same as really any kind of genealogy research. But in a Chinese setting, what is even more important is finding as many names and variants of names as possible, not just in English, but especially in Chinese characters. So this means records that have signatures or tombstone inscriptions. And the same thing goes for places. As Steve mentioned, it can be difficult to locate exactly where your ancestors came from back in China. There was no standardized way of, until recently, there was no standardized way of writing in English an address that was in China. So you end up with all sorts of different spellings for the same place. And this is why having the Chinese characters, whether it's for a name or an address, can be really helpful to disambiguate where this place actually is. And on the topic of places, I just want to bring up a pretty crucial point, I think, for those who are interested in researching beyond the story of immigration of their family. So if you want to find out where your family, where your ancestors came from in China before they settled in wherever it was, Trinidad and Tobago or the US or Canada, then really the key to finding anything about your family is knowing the ancestral place of your ancestors. So what do I mean by an ancestral village? I mean the hamlet or the village, the address that your family stayed at before they left. So this is not a big city like Hong Kong or Canton or Shanghai, but it is the hamlet that they were from. So China, unlike other countries, did not consistently record births or deaths or marriages like we have in the West. So for example, birth certificates were only made compulsory across China in the 1990s. So prior to that, you're unlikely to find an official birth certificate, especially if your ancestor was born in the 1920s or even 1940s. So instead, the types of records that you are most likely to find will be in the ancestral village. And the reason they would be found in the ancestral village is because in most cases, Chinese society was extremely local. Historically, if you look at the full history of China, for most of its history, most people were living in the countryside. They were farmers, and they stayed. They didn't move very much for several hundreds of years at a time. So you will find little hamlets and villages where the local community that usually shares the same surname has been established for many hundreds of years. If I to give you an example, my great grandfather, who came from China, came from a little village called Yap Village. So that's the same as my surname, which is Yap. And our Yap ancestors have been established in that village for several hundreds of years. And even to this day, most people who live there are Yaps. And in the village, there is a temple dedicated to our Yap ancestors. There is a graveyard dedicated to our Yap ancestors. Um, when I went there, I was able to meet with older folks who could share stories about, who my great grandfather was and who our Yap forefathers were. And finally, this is also the place where you are most likely to find your family tree book. So all of these types of sources are traditionally found in your ancestral village. Um, and yeah, you're unfortunately there is no sort of central archive where you can plug in a name and you'll get official documentation. No, instead, especially the most likely written document that you would find in China are these family tree books. Now, on the My China Roots database, we have, as I mentioned earlier, quite a significant number of digitized family tree books that are also searchable by name. So this cuts out a lot of work that you would otherwise have to do to find your village, travel to the village, find an interpreter who can speak Chinese and also read Chinese, check that the book contains your ancestors' names, and all these really high effort steps. So I'll be showing you how to do this, even without needing to read Chinese in a second. Also, as a side note, FamilySearch has also a large number of digitized family tree books on their website that can be browsed. Okay, so moving on. Let me check on comments whether there were any. Okay.
Yeah, Kathy had said, were they afraid of being deported and imprisoned?
Regarding the Chinese exclusion, I mean, yes, definitely. The threat was, I mean, for many years, if you were a Chinese person and you were found out to be in the US illegally, then you could be deported. I mean, and the government tried on different occasions to basically find an excuse to deport people. So yes, they were definitely scared of being sent back. Um, yeah. Joyce has, oh, sorry. Yeah,
Okay,
Steve, I'll answer Steve's question first. Does My China Roots have plans to do more in Southeast Asia, particularly Thailand and Malaysia? I mean, yes, we do, not in the immediate future, unfortunately. I would say, yeah, Thailand, Malaysia, and Southeast Asia are incredibly rich places when it comes to resources. But as opposed, I think, to other parts of the world, they retain a lot more connections to back to mainland China. So especially through overseas Chinese organizations and societies that already do this kind of work. But eventually, yes, I mean, I perhaps selfishly am also very much interested in us adding more records from places like Malaysia. To be honest, it also depends on the kinds of partnerships that are available to us and the people who want to partner with us. But yeah, in the longer term, definitely. Okay. Joyce had a few questions about OCR.
There we go.
You had a question about the OCR that my channel offers through a link. So I'm not sure what OCR you are talking about. Oh, my camera has just frozen. Um, hmm. I'm not sure which OCR you're talking about. So if you mean the automatic OCR that is available to our individual customers, I can briefly mention it at the end, but it is not available through our library subscription. We do use OCR technology, which is basically just optical character recognition, right? And we use this to extract text from our jiapu. So this happens in the back end. You don't see it happening. You can just use the search and you reap the benefits of that scanning process. But it's not. Oh gosh, I'm still stuck. um, yeah, it's it's not available to the public through the database subscription. So we do have a service. Let me see if I can show you. Um, we do have an OCR service that is available to individual users. So if you register on mychinaroots.com and and then just upload any image to your personal account. It can be a tombstone or it can be like a handwritten signature, something like that. Then you have the option to extract the text from it. I should say, though, it is a beta feature. So we're still testing it. The quality is not very high yet. Um, but, oh, you received the link through the email. I'm not sure which link this is. Um, but yes, it's still very much in beta. I know I'm frozen, Kathy. I'm not sure how to stop it. Okay, let's try again. No, my camera is still frozen in this horrible expression. Please bear with me. We're back. Um, okay, we have quite a lot of questions, but I think I'll move on with the demo and maybe we can come back to some a little bit later. Hope that's okay. Okay.
Sounds good.
So I'll just walk you through what kind of resources we have on the website and specifically how is our resource different from other sort of genealogy databases. So let me just pull up the website. Okay, so this is the homepage for the My China Roots database. As I mentioned, you just go to mychinarootslibrary.com. Again, this is accessible only at certain public libraries and at the FamilySearch library. This is the reason we're all here today. So if you have the chance to go check it out, you will be able to access all of this stuff completely free. So I'm on the homepage of my China Roots library, and the same as FamilySearch and Ancestry and all these other websites, you have a basic form that you can see and an overview of the different types of record categories that we have available. Now I'm just going to use several different case studies to show you and to give you basically a way around the website. So let's say I have an ancestor called George Chong. I don't read or write any Chinese. I just know that's his name. I know roughly when he was alive and roughly where he was living. If I click search, I get about 70 results. In the left-hand bar, I can filter by these different categories of records. I can filter also by the country where he was, where the record is from, by gender, by Chinese surname, and also by roughly the date that the event took place, and whether or not there is an image associated with that record. Now, we'll have, of course, some records that you may have seen already or that you may have found on other platforms. But the way that my China Roots is different is that we will often try as much as possible to contextualize some of these collections as they pertain to Chinese community specifically. So, for example, this is an entry from the 1940s US Census. And so we have all this information about George Chong. You'll see that his surname is hyperlinked. So what we've done here is we have connected his surname to our My China Roots surname database. Over the years, we've collected a lot of data about different Chinese surnames, where they come from, what they mean, to help people specifically, especially if they don't read Chinese or understand Chinese, to help them learn more about their surname and thus their family. So what's interesting with Chinese surnames is that a lot of them may be spelled differently, but are actually connected. As is the case with Chong, it has many, many related surnames that are spelled in all kinds of different ways. This is because of the nature of the Chinese language. Depending on the dialect that someone speaks, the same character can be pronounced in many different ways. So if you speak Cantonese, your surname might sound different than if you spoke Hokkien, even though it's technically the same surname. Meanwhile, if your ancestor immigrated to a Spanish-speaking country or an English-speaking country, then your surname might also be spelled in quite a different way. Now, in addition, in the Chinese language, many different words might have the same pronunciation. And this applies to surnames for sure. You have one pronunciation, which is Chong, but which could correspond to all of these different Chinese surnames. So how do you figure out which is your Chinese surname? Because ultimately, each of these correspond to different roots, different heritage, different stories, different records. So how do you figure out which one is yours? There are several clues you can use. You might know already what your surname means. In my case, I know that my surname is the same word as leaf. So you can check the meaning and see whether it corresponds. You could also check the countries where this surname has been known to migrate to. Or the easiest really is you ask a relative who does write Chinese, you ask them to scribble it for you, or you ask them to confirm. You send them this list and you ask them to confirm which one it is. So this particular one right here is actually quite a common one in North America. So I'm just going to select this Chong, which is also Zhang in Mandarin. And if I click on it, I'll see that this surname has a lot more information. So I can see it written in simplified and traditional. I can learn about the legendary origins of the surname. I can also see how many family tree books exist for this this particular surname. Now, I mentioned family tree books earlier. They are really the holy grail when it comes to Chinese genealogy, because if you find your book, you can find hundreds of years of history in one go. And all you need really is one or several Chinese names of relatives so you want to be able to match a name of an ancestor within the book to be able to confirm that it's your book. So we'll take a look at these in a second. I can also see on this page what other Chong or Zhang records are available in other record categories on the database. So if I click on them, I can browse some more. I can see which regions in China, in Southeast China, historically, Chongs settled in. So this helps you basically take a shortcut to view what are the ancestral villages in Guangdong and Fujian that your family might be from. And at the bottom, I can also see how my surname, my Chong surname, is pronounced, but in different dialects, and how it evolved in different countries. And you'll see in places like Indonesia that there's really a lot of integration happening and assimilation with people morphing their surnames to sound more Indonesian. This happens a lot in all kinds of places. And so this is where you realize that, oh, actually, there is no strict translation from English back into Chinese. If you want to reverse engineer that translation, what you really need are the Chinese characters. Yeah. So if you want to play around with the surname database, you can also do so directly from myChinaRootsLibrary.com. So you see this tab at the top called Resources. There is a section called Chinese surnames. If you click on that, and you can type in whatever you want, any common Chinese surname, Wong or Li or Yo, or as you wish. Okay, so this is the first. We looked at one case of a record. We looked at a surname. Now I want to just mention another use case, which happens a lot when you're researching a Chinese ancestor. So I'm just looking up this guy. Maybe he's also a relative of mine, Yok Sway Lim. Now, what's interesting about this particular record, I have about 100 results, but really the one I want to show you is this first one, which I found earlier. So this Yok Lim record is an entry to an alien case file held at San Francisco. So it's from the National Archives. And you'll see that My China Roots partners with many different organizations, big or small, to collect data about Chinese immigrants. In this case, there is no image available because usually alien case files are quite protected. You need to apply for a copy yourself. They haven't all been scanned. So in this case, you can just click the link, go to partner site, and it will open a National Archives record, and you can apply for it directly there. But this is not why I wanted to show you this particular record. The reason why I wanted to show you this one is that this entry lists many different names for this Yok Lim person. He was not just known as Yok Lim, he was known as Yu Jue Lim, he was known as Hongfi, even just as Fa. I don't know what that's about. He was known as Yok Sway Wing, as Harry, as Yok Sway Lum. This is all the same person, supposedly from this case file. And this is very, very common. So if you are getting stuck and not finding a particular record of an ancestor, you may have more luck by trying an alternative name. So the alternative names are often listed in a case file, whether it's a Chinese exclusion case file or an alien case file. Sometimes alternative names are also listed on tombstones, and it's really worth trying to search for these other names. So you might be wondering why there are so many different names for one single person. This is actually a Chinese tradition. A lot of men specifically traditionally could have 4 or 5 different milestone names that correspond to different settings and different times of their life. So you could have a courtesy name, a style name, an art name, a posthumous name, a married name. You also had like a milk name when you were just born. So these just go through the different stages of life. And you don't know which name an ancestor may have used at any point in time. So keeping that in mind, because we know that it was typical for Chinese immigrants to adapt their names, sometimes just drop out or leave out one part of their name. When you run a search on My China Roots, we also always include partial matches because we know that this happens quite often. Like in this case, Yok Sway Lim sometimes may well have gone by Yok Lim, and this is why this result is shown at the top. So that's one key thing to think about when you're doing this kind of research. So we've looked at names. I want to talk about places just for a second because, well, as Steve mentioned, it's often very challenging to locate ancestral places in China, not just because of spellings, but also because of history. A lot of borders and administrative sort of boundaries have changed. with time, which means that even if you have a location or you have an address, when you type it into, say, Google Maps or you look it up, it doesn't seem to exist anymore. So it's probably been renamed. Now, this is quite a common problem. To illustrate this, let's say I have an ancestor who has roots in Hoi Ping, right? Now, if I go to Google Maps and I type in Hoi Ping, I have 0 results. Google Maps cannot find Hoi Ping. But if I search for it on my Chan roots, let's see, I look for this person, Phoon Quan, who was from a place called Hoi Ping. The database tells me, okay, Hoi Ping could be Hoi Ping City, which is in Jiangmen, also known as Kaiping, or it could be a Hoi Ping community in Shantou. I'm going to just select this first one because it's the first one suggested and search. And indeed, it has found 3 results. The latter 2 are not really relevant. They're not exact matches, but the first one is an exact match. It is a passenger list of a Phoon Quan person born in Hoi Ping in Guangdong, China. Now, again, this is where my China roots is different. When there is a Chinese place mentioned on a record, we do our best to connect it to the closest possible location that we know of in China. So if I click on this link for Phoon Quan, I see the image of the passenger list, and under record details, under his birthplace is hyperlinked. And if I click on it, it will open the corresponding page on our village database. So similar to a surname database, we also have a village database. Now, Hoi Ping is the Hoi San pronunciation of Kaiping in Mandarin Chinese. Kaiping is actually very famous, especially in North America. A lot of Chinese Americans have roots in Hoi Ping. It's one of the overseas Chinese hubs. So on this page, I can learn a bit of history and context about the area. Where did people migrate to? Where is it on the map? Where is it relative to Macau or Hong Kong, where they would have likely had to take a ferry, take a ship over to North America? At the bottom, I can also see how many family tree books exist from this area of Hoi Ping. I can see what other kinds of records are available for this place. And most importantly, at the bottom is a list of towns and villages that are within Hoi Ping. And again, this is to encourage people to try and get as close as possible to their ancestral village. We also have some, but limited, historical place names on the database. We're still working on improving this database because sometimes we come across a new spelling or a new historical name that we didn't know about. So if you do have any feedback on this one, then we'd love to hear from you. But this is a great first step. And if you do have a location that you found, or a village, or even just a region that you're not sure you can't place, then you can search for it on our village database. If you go to resources, again, under Chinese surnames, there is Chinese villages, and then you can search for whatever kind of location in China you're curious about. Amoy is another big port that a lot of Chinese people came from. Oh, and my page is bugging. Yeah, and it's located in Fujian province. So do have a play around with this as well. Okay, I'm going to go back to my search. Let's see what was I looking at? Phoon Quan. So now I'm just going to show you what other kinds of records we have on the database. Just like any other platform, you have a simplified search, but you can also add as many fields as you like to your search. You can add information about birth, about death. You can search multiple family members at the same time. You can filter by a particular type of record that you want to see. But generally, the way that I use the database is I type in a name, sometimes a location, and then I just use the filters on the results page because I find that a bit easier just to see what I'm working with because I don't want to exclude too many things from my search yet. Knowing that there are so many spellings that my ancestor might have used, or he might have lied about his age, or he might have, you know, um, just been a little bit more flexible with spellings of things. So I want to keep it very open. So I'll just search for just the name. For Fun Quan, I have 76 results in total across the database. I can see different types of results on the left-hand side here. So we've already seen uh, some examples of census records. So censuses are great, especially for Chinese families, because um, so many Chinese people have similar sounding names. So often what helps is when you see a record that has different relatives on it. And censuses are wonderful precisely for this reason, because you'll be able to see people with their children and their spouses all in one place. And this is how you figure out whether it's the right family or not. Okay. We also have some pretty typical records like passenger and crew lists, some of which we've also looked at. Um, and what I would recommend, especially for Chinese passenger lists, is to always look at the second page. So I don't think this one is one of these, but especially in some of the later passenger lists from the 1930s onwards, you would often find people list their relatives or closest sort of like next of kin on the second page of a passenger list. And that one will often record the ancestral place or the address that someone's wife was still living at back in China. So there's a lot of information that can be found in these passenger lists, but it hasn't always been indexed, is the main challenge. So for any record that you find here, you can, of course, expand the image. You just click View in Original Record, and you have access to the full page. You can zoom in. If the page is not rotated the right way around, you can spin it around. You can flip between pages as you wish. You could also search for a keyword across the whole source. I mean, this is pretty powerful. You might not want to do it in a 27,000 page source, but just letting you know that it's there. Okay, so moving back to different record categories, I've showed you the ways in which my channel which displays data that is quite unique. I would say we're also unique in our focus on sources that will be of Chinese people. For example, the types of records that we really try to populate on the database are going to be often Chinese specific records, such as Chinese exclusion records. So as we mentioned, during the exclusion period, a lot of Chinese people were not allowed into the United States. But there were a few exceptions. If you were, for example, a merchant, or if you were a student, or if you were already settled there um, before the exclusion period, or if you were a native, so if you were born in the US, then you could stay. But you had to have the right paperwork always. And even if you left the country just on holiday, you still had to apply to be allowed back in, and you had to answer all sorts of questions and provide all kinds of documentation. So this whole process is documented in different sources. One of these is exclusion books. Again, this is very US specific. But in these exclusion books, these were usually kept at some of the key ports of entry into the United States. So for example, here we have an entry for Fun Quan in Chinese arriving passenger arrival books from San Francisco. So probably this Fun Quan stayed at Angel Island, and this book tells you what status he was applying under and whether he was allowed in or not. So let's take a look at this page. You'll see that it lists names, the class, so whether they were son of a native or a native, these are all sons of natives. So Quan Fuan is up here. He was residing in San Francisco and he was admitted. Um, Now, normally you can also see which date they were. Oh, yes, at the top of the page, it says, uh, so he probably was admitted quite quickly. If this is the date of admission, June 5th, um, some of them stay much longer. Some of them stayed for many weeks, sometimes months, before they were processed at Angel Island. And so these tell you whether they were allowed in and also what their status was during the time. And on the flip side to these exclusion books, you have the actual case files. So these are Chinese exclusion case files. They would contain all of the application papers that would then allow people back into the country. So there are 22 case files for Fun Quan. Some of them have images, some of them do not. If we look at this first one, this one has scans. And these are really, really rich files. If you have an ancestor um, who spent some time in the US, then during this period, then it's really worth trying to apply for a copy or to check if there are scans available. These are really rich. Some of them are 30, 50 pages long. This one is only 15 or so, but it can have photographs, sometimes handwritten letters by the applicant, letters of testimony by some of their business partners, for example, who just attest to their identity, that they are indeed who they claim they are. You also have transcripts of interviews sometimes with immigration officials. You have copies of passports, ID certificates. And in this case, again, we have transcribed the Chinese, not again, sorry, this is the first time we're seeing this, but wherever there is a Chinese signature, where possible, we try to index it as well. This is where we're different. We are truly trying to be a bilingual platform by making it easier for folks who don't read Chinese and by extracting those the Chinese data points onto the file. So this is again still a work in progress. We're making our way through a lot of different collections. So here the Chinese surname again is hyperlinked. If I click on it, it will open the surname page for this particular surname, this Quan. The other records that are, I would say, quite specific to Chinese genealogy that you wouldn't necessarily find on other platforms. The first I want to mention is cemetery records. I think Steve was mentioning some of these. So far we've been searching for individuals, but you can also just run a more general search to see what sort of collections and resources we have available. Let's say, for example, you want to know what cemeteries there are in a particular place, right? Let's say, what I've done just now is I've gone under the search tab on the homepage and then selected birth, marriage, and death, because that's probably where I would find cemeteries. Then on this page, I can see that I can search for a person within this category, or I can search by keyword for a source. At the bottom, though, there is a link to see all the sources within this category. So let me just click on that. There are quite a few different types, but I just want to see cemeteries in the United States. So we have quite a few here, and cemeteries are really valuable because they are so intertwined with the history of Chinese communities in that specific country. In many places, Chinese people were not allowed to be buried alongside other groups, other ethnic groups. So they often had to rely on their local Chinese society or clubs to raise money, to purchase land, to allow them to be buried. So it's very interesting to learn about this history. Sometimes these societies were also responsible for shipping bones back to mainland China. So whenever we are able to, we try to partner with smaller local community groups and cemeteries that have tombstones of Chinese people. So these are going to be Chinese specific cemeteries. And the reason for this is the tombstones have a lot more information than first meets the eye. So we're looking at now the Chinese Christian cemetery in South San Francisco, just as an example. On this page, I can read more about the cemetery. I can also search for someone in the cemetery. I could also just decide to browse all the records within this cemetery. And again, these are all bilingual. We've annotated both the English and the Chinese. Let me just actually search for someone here to show you what happens and why. Oh, wrong way around. So why are tombstones so valuable? Tombstones so valuable? You might think that the Chinese is a direct translation or representation of whatever is in English, but at least in places like the US, often what is written in Chinese is going to be much, much more detailed. Here, for this Feng Li person, we don't only have his name his um, and his dates, but we also have the full address of his ancestral place that we have transcribed and also tried as best as possible to locate on our database. So again, both the surname and the birthplace will be connected to our surname database and our village database. The other thing that we do whenever there is a Chinese name on any record, whether it's a cemetery record or anything like that, is we will automatically search for that Chinese name in our collection of family tree books. So at the bottom of this page, you'll see there is a link to view 14 potential records of the Chinese name of this person, Li Feng. So if I click on that, I end up on a page that has 14 results for 14 different Li family tree books for this Li Feng person who was buried in South San Francisco. So again, just to recap, these family tree books have not been, these family tree books that are My China Roots have not been manually indexed. So what we're looking at are full text search results. So all these books have been OCR'd, and then we are searching for the Chinese characters within the OCR'd materials to see if there is a match. So it's not 100% accurate, but it does get you pretty close. So why are there 14 results for the Li surname? Surely the Li surname, there's just one Li surname, but there's not just one Li book. There are hundreds, thousands of Li family tree books across China. What you want to do at this stage is narrow down the place that you know your family is from to find the right book that is relevant to you. Because the Li family spread its branches all across China. Over the years, some of them settled in the south, some of them settled in the north. This is why it's so important to know your ancestral place. So from the tombstone, the Li Feng person's tombstone, his birthplace is actually somewhere in Shuibu town in Toisan. So we know that he's from Toisan. So if we go back to our list of results, we're definitely going to want to filter these results by this place, Toisan, or at least look for a book that is from Toisan. And indeed, this fourth or fifth result is a match in a Li family tree book from Toisan, which is perfect. So I'm going to click on it, click on the image to look at it, and this will open normally the page or the pages where this name appears. The Taishan Li family tree book is a massive book. It's 8,000 pages long, and it has, thousands and thousands of names inside it. you'll see that it's quite a modern publication. Some of these are quite ancient, some have been re-edited, reprinted, republished, cleaned up a bit. The advantage of these modern publications is that it's much easier to OCR and to read. So here is the match for Li Feng's name. Now, again, I haven't typed any Chinese. I just clicked a link on a tombstone page that I found. And if I click on any character on this page, it tells me, I have this automatic Chinese English dictionary that pops up and tells me what these characters mean. So we have a lot of people who just use this to decipher documents, to make sense of things. Now, underneath Li Feng's name, what I would, I guess, what I would want to do at this stage to figure out if this is indeed my ancestor Li Feng or not, is I would compare the names of his father, of his brother, and maybe of his children. But I noticed that under him there is just this one character that is zhi, and literally means, according to the dictionary, to stop. So this means his line has stopped, I guess. So this is probably not my ancestor. But just for the sake of example, this is to show you that even without any prior Chinese knowledge, you can figure some things out yourself. But if this was my ancestor, let's say the names of let's say this person had children and the names of the children matched, the names of the father matched my family tree, then I'd be pretty sure that this is my book. Now I just want to bring your attention to this column here on the side, which for those who don't read Chinese, we will also translate very quickly. So these characters here across from where the Li Feng name is shown, let's see if we can figure out what it says. It says 23 and then generation. So it's saying that Li Feng is of the 23rd generation in this book, in the Taishan Li clan, which means that if he is my ancestor, I have 22 more generations of ancestors in this book that I can find, which is a considerable amount that you can get just with one record. And again, this is why Zupus are so powerful. You get so much if you know where to look, and if you find the right name, you get a lot in one go. And you don't only get family trees, you also get lots of other content. So let's see if I can just show you, especially in these modern types of books, you will sometimes find photos of famous ancestors or local histories, lots of contextual info about how the surname came about in the early days in 2000 BC. You'll find legendary stories of ancestors and how the clan migrated through China. And again, you can use our dictionary, but if needed, you could also hire My China Roots separately from this database access. If you're interested in translation help, I believe there was someone who was asking about getting an English translation of their jiapu. You can do this by visiting the link that Tana shared earlier, which is mychinaroots.com/services. But there is a considerable amount that you can do just with this. If you want to know more about some background about the book itself, where it was published, when it was published, you just click this little eye icon at the top of the viewer, and then that will bring you to this details page. You can click view full details. So that's that. These are the Zupu collections. I'm going to wrap up very quickly now because I'm conscious of time, but the only other resources that I think are quite specific to Chinese communities and that are really valuable are our association and community directories. So wherever Chinese people went, they created their own resources, their own telephone directories, their own business directories. I mean, here is an example, but you can find all kinds of information from these. And the great thing is, again, they're bilingual. You can have short biographies, business names, addresses, names of relatives. So do check these out. These are also accessible through the main search. If you go to the home page and then just browse the categories that are here. This is the one. And then finally, the other general resources that you can check out are overseas Chinese communities. This is a new page that we're working on. We're basically gathering data from different places where Chinese people established quite large communities, trying to gather historical materials and also resources for how do you trace your ancestors if you are from X, whether it's Singapore or the West Indies. This is still very much a work in progress, but do have a browse already. And then the other thing that we have is our My China Roots genealogy wiki. Similarly, gathers different tips for starting your research. Okay, that's it from me. I'll be happy to take any questions from whoever's still sticking around.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that awesome presentation. Yeah, if
Yeah,
anyone
sorry I
has,
ran a bit over time.
oh, it's okay. I really enjoyed it. But if anyone has any questions, go ahead and post them into the chat or the comments section. Charlene Wong says, have recent generations in the US been keeping the Zubu updated?
That's an excellent question, Charlene. It really depends on the family and where the zupu is and who keeps it. I mean, I've known of some families uh, whose, let's say, the granddad or the dad would send back information or names of people who were born in the US back to the village, so that they could update the zoo pool. But usually, I mean, depending on the links, that might not happen automatically. It could be that whenever someone travels back to China to pay their respects, to visit the ancestral village, then at that point, um, the person visiting would share the names of whoever they remember. I mean, I did this when I went back to my village. The Chinese villagers there were asking me all sorts of questions about who's who in the clan, and um, so I just drew a little tree for them, and then they updated their own records. So it really depends on who is involved and who has the energy to do it. Maybe it could be you, Charlene. Maybe you should be the keeper of your family tupu. Um,
Awesome.
mm,
Joyce had asked a question about the 1953 census. Uh,
mm. I remember looking into this. I can't remember exactly, but I don't think I was successful in finding um in in basically finding out whether we could access them. If I remember correctly, that data is not available to the public. It's the same as Chinese household registrations, for example. So even though there are no official documents that are technically like birth certificates or death certificates that you could have access to, China has actually been keeping, originally for taxation purposes and keeping track of how many people live in which house. They did have a kind of census that they took every few years, um, but that data is really not at all available unless you are a member of that household or unless you are a direct relative of that household. So unfortunately, it cannot be used for research. Um, but yeah, sadly, this 1953 census, uh, we have not access to it. We've not got access to it.
Douglas asked a question about,
Mm-hmm.
he said, regarding my China route services, is there someone who may be able to do an intake call in the daytime?
Oh, we should be. It could be that there are no slots available immediately, but why don't you drop us an email? And if you just submit a form through mychinaroots.com/services rather than booking a call, and to just say that you haven't been able to find a time slot, we can see if we can figure something out. But that should be possible. We'll just the people who who are available for consultations are based in Europe and in Singapore. So my European colleague would probably take your call. But yeah, do get in touch with us. The Chinese, okay, Jim Lee asked a question about the Chinese English dictionary. So the Chinese English dictionary is embedded in the website. So you can only use it when you are using the website. This was like, yeah, this was sort of built and generated by us. I don't know the exact plugin that we use. Um, yeah, but if you're looking for something off the shelf, then you can just Google, Chinese English um, OCR dictionary or something like this into Google, and you'll find different options. And like I was explaining to Joyce about our OCR service, maybe I can show you how this works. Hold on. Okay, so right now I'm just opening my personal My China Roots account. So this is not the library account. This is the one where I have my family tree and I get hints whenever I get record matches. But so one of the things that we added recently that is still very, very much in beta, so it's still testing, but you can try it out if you want to, um, is this OCR service. So if you upload an image and say you want to extract the Chinese characters, I think it's very, very bad for Chinese handwriting, by the way. But we're working on improving it. So you can select here under media files. You see this bit here that says extract text. So you can click extract text, and then it says select the area to extract text from. You can select the text like this. Then click again, extract selected area. And then select a different type of software to try and extract the characters. Don't think it really works with this particular image because it's so blurry and it's very rough handwriting. But I think with typed characters, it's much better. But essentially, this is I think the OCR tool that Joyce was asking about. Otherwise, the Chinese English dictionary only works within the database. Yeah.
Awesome. Let's see. Joyce had just said that the OCR dictionary is great. So thank you.
Great. Thank you. Yes, it's very handy. I use it all the time.
Mm-hmm. I think we've hit all the questions. If there's anyone watching that I missed your question, it might have just gotten buried in the chat. So go ahead and type it in again, so I don't miss it. I think we've answered all the questions.
Yeah, and if you do have any more questions, then my email is right here. If you're interested on how to access the database, just shoot me an email. As a reminder, the database is being trialed by the FamilySearch library until August 31st. So do go and try it out and tell the volunteers how much you love it. And yeah, just try and spread the word, and hopefully that means we can make it available in more FamilySearch centers, if not just the FamilySearch library.
Yeah, I would love to have it available everywhere. I think most of the audience would too. So tell everyone how great it is. Okay, Ken has a question.
Yep.
It says Hong Kong was a major port that Chinese immigrants leave or return to China. Does the English UK records record those travels? Can we access those whether in English or in Chinese?
That is an excellent question. Um, I'm actually not sure if those, especially if the ships were departing from Hong Kong, even if it was when Hong Kong was still administered by the UK. I'm not sure if those archives would actually be at the National Archives in the UK or in Hong Kong. I haven't seen them personally, but they may well be buried somewhere in the archives, which is why I haven't. Um, but I would assume that there are some, and that these would be in English, especially if they were traveling on British ships. If they were traveling on Chinese ships, then that would be a different matter.
Awesome.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't want to give you an incorrect or hazy answer. So
Yeah.
yes, thanks, Charmaine, for the National Archives link.
Yeah, I'll put that
They
link.
definitely have a lot of shipping records at the National Archives, which are searchable on Ancestry and Find My Past. Um, yeah.
Okay. Um, yeah, Ken's wondering, are there documents just about the population?
General population of Hong Kong? Oh, most likely, yes. Probably. I haven't seen them myself, but I think that is um, a very likely assumption that you would find those at the National Archives in the UK. By the way, if you can visit the National Archives, it's a very cool building in London. Very fun to do research from there.
Awesome.